Sustainability and the New Silk Road. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, also known as the New Silk Road Initiative, is a foreign policy concept of the Chinese government that focuses on investments in the construction of roads, rail lines, ports, and pipelines, among other things, to create the conditions for economic growth in less developed countries in these regions in order to open up new markets and to strengthen China's economic, political, and cultural influence. What is the role of sustainability and the SDGs? This is still a blind spot in the development of the New Silk Road, and that is the main subject of this high-level panel discussion. Let's start by presenting Dr. Miguel Ángel Serna, whose professional background includes journalism, diplomacy, international trade, globalization, sustainability, and organizational development, higher education and consulting on China relations, and international cooperation and conflict resolution. He has conducted extensive studies and research in behavioral science, psychology, social psychology, and neuroscience, and he is currently in Europe conducting field research on behavioral economics. Thank you, Miguel. Please also welcome Mr. Carlo D'Andrea, who is National Vice President of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China and also founder and managing partner of D'Andrea and Partner Legal Counsel. The European Union Chamber of Commerce is recognized by the European Commission and the Chinese authorities as the official voice of European business in China. Welcome, Carlo. We also count on the participation of Peggy Liu. She is considered the leading catalyst of the greening of China. Peggy instigated the clean energy and smart grid revolutions, trained majors to build sustainable cities, and shaped the national slogan, China Dream. As chairperson of JUCI, Peggy Liu is one of the leading catalysts for a green China and consults companies and governments on sustainability and cross-cultural collaboration with China. Welcome, Peggy. Our last participant is Professor May Tan Mullins. She is Dean International of James Cook University and Chief Sustainability Officer. May Tan Mullins' research interests are political ecology of rising China, environmental and energy justice, poverty alleviation, and building resilience for the poorest and most vulnerable in the tropics. Thank you, May. I would therefore now like to hand things over to Frank Ebinger, the moderator of this panel discussion on sustainability and the New Silk Road. Professor Ebinger has more than 25 years of experience as a lecturer, consultant, and advisor in the fields of sustainable management and innovation. Professor Ebinger is an executive board member of the German EMAS Advisory Board, UGA, at the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Protection, and a member of the working group of the National Contact Point for the OECD guidelines at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Frank, the floor is yours.
Welcome to the panel Sustainability and the New Silk Road. My name is Frank Ebinger and I will be the moderator of this panel. Yeah, and I would like to start our discussion with one major aspect, starting with the beneficiaries, with the benefits from the New Silk Road. And my first question for all of us, and maybe one of you might start with answering. How can new cooperative modes of governance balance geopolitical, societal, and environmental interests somehow being balanced out? How can geopolitical, societal, and environmental interests are balanced out in the New Silk Road approach? Do you have any idea? Maybe you would like to start with it.
Thank you, Frank. I think you started off with the most difficult question for this panel, partly because you're trying to look at from the political angle and the environmental angle and the social angle together, and seeing how we will benefit, or how the Belt and Road Initiative will benefit the host communities. I've done a lot of research on Belt and Road for the last about 20 years. And I mean, when I first started, it was more Chinese investment in Africa. And somehow, a lot of these projects been rolled into the Belt and Road Initiative. So what I've observed is that it's very, very challenging to balance because, in each and different country, each and different project, the outcomes are very different, partly because the stakeholders are very different. And as a result, and also the local geographical context is very different, cultural context. So as a result, what might seem like a good project for one country with quite balanced outcome in terms of Chinese achieving its geopolitical aims, with the local community, benefiting in terms of employment and environmental is being taken care of with EIA and ESG intents, might not work for another country. So I guess my very simple answer to these very difficult questions, and I believe other panelists also will come in very quickly, is that it's difficult to give you a one-fits-all solution or answer because it's very dependent on the local stakeholders, on the local context, as well as the geographical makeup of the projects. Maybe other colleagues would like to join. Yeah.
So, Miguel, do you have any idea how can we balance it? What is your view on it?
Yeah, so as May said, this is a very difficult, a very wide question, so I cannot have just a very short answer to that. But the truth is that balance is an idea more than a reality if we don't acknowledge our differences. I believe that equality or win-win could come only and only if we acknowledge that the interests of all the parties cooperating are different. Also, the capabilities are different. So the balance factor comes from who defines what balance is, and then to reach an agreement based on that definition. And that's where things get a little bit dirty and a little bit difficult, because normally the one who raises the hand first in terms of what balance is also defending their geopolitical strategy. So I say to you 2 days ago, there is nothing non-geopolitical in international cooperation. Thing is that the interests are different. So we need to acknowledge that I want this and I want to know what the other person wants. And so starting finding out that balance in terms of accepting or not our differences. Basically, going deep into this, it takes us like forever. But that will be, in simple words, how I would see the approach that we need to take to balance, rather than to say, how to reach this balance. We need to discuss the differences in what we want, and then to find out what balance is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Miguel, for your answer. Peggy,
should we do girl guy?
You found out.
Yeah. The question itself is basically like, talk about Belt and Road. It's so open. So, what strikes me about this moment and looking at the Belt and Road is that this is a movement, and movements go through many different phases. I liken it to a tornado. And in my work, which is basically helping create societal shifts over and over and over again, so that we are essentially bringing in a better future faster for everyone, I see that tornadoes go through 3 phases. And so there's the launch of the tornado, which Xi Jinping did when he talked about the initial vision of Belt and Road. And I remember at that time, I was at the China Academy of Governance, and I asked them, what is this Belt and Road? And they brought every single professor at the time that touched parts of what they thought the Belt and Road was. And I had a whole slew of questions. I said, I'm being bombarded with, what is this Belt and Road when I do my speaking around the world? And I would like to ask you all these questions. So I went through a huge list. And at the end, what I realized was nobody really got a definition of the Belt and Road. What Xi Jinping was doing was he was putting out this dream of a better future of common prosperity, initially through logistics, through infrastructure, and helping each country bilaterally and then multilaterally. It's this all boats rise together vision. But everybody has to do their part. Hawaiians call this, kuleana. Everybody has their calling to do their part in the service of creating this dream. And so I think we've gone through the launch part of a tornado. Now the question is, how do we keep the eye of the storm, all of us, calmly, with the center of gravity, carrying the initial beautiful parts of Xi Jinping's vision and not get spun out onto the sides of the tornado, causing friction, being misaligned with that initial vision of common prosperity, not geopolitics and dualism, but common prosperity. And so the way that I described strengthening the tornado at this stage that we're in, we can have micro learnings, spin the tornado, go up the staircase. We can have micro celebrations, constantly, regularly, consistently celebrating every little win and any little, let's say, train station that was launched or somebody did an MOU. All of these should be celebrated together loudly. And then lastly, micro asks. So we need to give every country a way that they can get onto the Belt and Road, onto the train, so to speak, in a safe way. And in a way that they can say yes or yes really easily. And so for me, we're at this third stage of strengthening the tornado, making it bigger and denser, spinning faster, and staying centered in the eye of the tornado. Now, we haven't got to the third stage yet, which is how do we jump through the vortex of the tornado to the future in an irrevocably changing way that society, no matter what we do from now, is going to understand that free trade between all these countries can bring solar panels, batteries that I need right now, lithium batteries in Hawaii. It's very difficult for me to get them. How do we make these beautiful, innovative solutions that are happening all over the world easily and equally accessible to everybody on the Belt and Road? So that's the vortex. That's the third stage. So that's what I would say. Rather than use the word balance, I would say stay centered and grounded in the eye of the storm.
Thank you, Peggy. Carlo, you are an expert in trade relations. What is your answer to that question? What is your answer to that topic of balancing out geopolitical, societal, and environmental interests?
So, first of all, I'm really happy that we are discussing about this project, because when we have the opportunity to meet the representative of the EU Commission, the Belt and Road Initiative is always a topic that it come out. Usually, when you have to move goods or people from one point A to point B, means that you're a passenger. Later on in China, I just come out from 70 plus day of total lockdown in Shanghai. So when you discuss about moving people, this is in China at the moment is not the priority. And indeed, when we had the opportunity as a chamber, but I believe we're going to come back on COVID-19 and the problem that brought to China and to business. When we are discussing about the road initiative, as European Chamber, we prepare a paper few months back, 1 year ago, something like this, in order to show to people the real essence of all the talks that China was doing about this important project, the maritime Belt and Road, and so on. Well, we realized that among all the interviews that we have carried out to our people, just 15% of our survey company have bid on a Belt and Road related project. And on those that have only dozen or so won roles in the moderate project. So what does this mean? Generally speaking, when we are discussing a Belt and Road Initiative, we felt that this is a project oriented for state-owned enterprises, mainly Chinese, which they have a special access to the real bidding and the rules of the game. Let's say they master better than European the rules of the game. And on the political point of view, is an instrument that you may speak with politicians, for example, and there are some countries that they are building highway now in Europe in order to connect, and the level of indebtedness really now creates problem to the leaders of the country. But the issue is they complete the task. So when we are discussing about the effect of the geopolitical of the Belt and Road Initiative, we have to also see the evolving of the situation, because the world that we have a few years back when President Xi surprised the world when roll out the project Belt and Road Initiative is a totally different world up now. In fact, living in China, now the Belt and Road Initiative is not the main slogan, let's say like this, that we hear repeating from the leading authorities in the country.
Thank you, Carlo, for your insights. So I can summarize that that as this question is a very, very broad question. It's a very difficult to answer it because it depends a bit on the capabilities, on the people, the countries which are involved, the level of readiness as well, and of course the economic situation. But on the other hand side, if we just look on the issues and the problems, it doesn't help us. We should look a bit forward towards a dream of prosperity, which Peggy mentioned, and of course, if we then see on all the actors at the front, we have to create, Carlo, a level playing field in order to see the rules of the game in a better and a transparent way in the collaboration. If I can summarize that first round in it. Yeah, but nevertheless, Carlo, you mentioned the evolving or the changing situation at the moment. We have the COVID pandemic, we have the conflict or the war in Ukraine, which affects at least direct or indirectly all the countries in the world, starting with the supply of grains or food, and ending with the issue of social impacts on the economic income of different people all around the world. So, Carlo, you mentioned we have to see the evolving situation and have to take it into account. But how can we do that? It's a very, very difficult question. But starting with you, Carlo, maybe. Do you have any idea how we can bring a kind of baseline level playing field into that endeavor?
So, as I mentioned, Belt and Road Initiative is a program that started in 2013, and there is also the Belt and Road, the Maritime Belt and Road. Let's speak now about the evolving situation and be on the ground here in China. What's going on? Like we had, I live in Shanghai, and we had the city locked since March, middle March till June 1st. There are still some areas in the lockdown, and this created a massive disruption on the logistics. There were over 500 plus container ships in the harbor of Shanghai waiting for unload their cargo, which create delay in the production, which create delay in the normal business life of companies, European companies in the territory. We had the opportunity to launch a flash survey during this period of time, And we realized that over 60% of our respondents declare that they will decrease their revenue projection of the year. And this on the point of number of business and revenue. But let's see also that all this COVID pandemic situation brought on employment, on youth employment. Let's say this not finding an agreement on which vaccine is best or which vaccine should be used. At the moment in China, still the European or the American vaccine, they are not allowed to be injected to people. And so this created, together with the extreme lockdown, with the uncertainty that bringing now in China over 18% of youth unemployment in the country. So when we are discussing an evolving framework, I want to say that European companies for a long time choose China for the predictability of the economy, or the possibility to invest and know what's going on in 1 year time. Well, this the COVID zero tolerance policy create doubts on the headquarters back in Europe. In fact, a large percentage of our respondents decide to evaluate and to postpone possible investment in the Chinese market. This doesn't mean that European companies are willing to leave the country. Please. I make the point. This doesn't mean European companies are willing to leave the country, but indeed there are still some thought about which one will be the next step of their investment in China.
So you mentioned that it's also depending on some environmental issues, or even that COVID pandemic has impacted the trade relations somehow, and make trade a bit difficult. Coming to another more global focus, Miguel, your point of view. Do you have any idea if you look on that issues?
So we're talking about how to sort of foresee what will happen in the future. This is an evolving framework, right? So basically, we cannot see the future, right? So it hasn't happened yet, but we could consider the trends that history has shown us. For example, we see Carlo just mentioned Xi Jinping surprised the world with the news about the New Silk Road. But the truth is that, or the way I see it, is that the world led China to surprise it, because we have not been paying attention to that. So we cannot foresee the future. We can just get ready for what could happen. And here I want to point out that the preventive attitude that the world should have, so that we don't get surprised by things that were actually in front of us, but we are not really acting towards prevention. We are acting towards reaction without having the tools beforehand. So I don't think it's really a something that we can very specifically say, okay, this is going to happen, and so I'm going to prepare the tools for this specific thing, right? But we could use the form of the verb could happen, and so I'd rather be ready with this and that. The dependability that exists in the global, in the world, is actually a sad result of how we have been developing globalization in poor ways, and that create local crises based on global situation. It shouldn't happen.
May, please.
Yes, I would like to jump in. I totally agree with Miguel in terms of the importance of history, in terms of learning from it. And quite interestingly, I told you, Frank, I'm now in a host meeting in a conference called The Tensions of Europe, giving a keynote on a very similar topic on sustainability and Belt and Road Initiative. And I find it's very interesting because in this conference, the historians actually invited me to look at the history, the development of Belt and Road, looking at how it has evolved during the last years, and especially then trying to look forward in terms of what has COVID done to it? Is it going to stay relevant? Is it going to become irrelevant? Or is it going to become more expensive and more embraced by people? I agree with Miguel as well. There's no way we can predict what's going to happen in the future, but what we can really do is to learn from, the different projects in the past, learning from how communities and stakeholders actually embrace it or mitigate it, or how then they could react preemptively in terms of what's going to happen. So I think that's the important part, is to learn from history and past projects and seeing what we can do better in terms of mitigating or working with these different Belt and Road Initiative projects.
Peggy, what do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting looking to the past. I often say, don't judge China based on previous administrations. Xi Jinping is Xi Jinping, Mao is Mao. So I guess, there's pros and cons to that statement. But it's interesting. Xi Jinping's, I think, PhD thesis, if you want to look to that past, was on rural revitalization. And today, document 1 really emphasizes rural revitalization. And how do you do that? Through rail, through being able to make and then sell your goods, to ship your goods. And so I find it really interesting that all of this is converging. The high-speed rail, when I was first looking at it developing 2007, it first started in 2007. By 2012, 5 years later, China had the largest high-speed rail in the world. And I think now we have Laos, right, going down south with some, I think, a lot of activity. If you look at videos of people now taking that Belt and Road segment, they're very excited about the improvement. So I think that if we look at Xi Jinping's, past, the thesis, we know that the emphasis has now moved from places like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and a lot of the resources are pushing people inwards towards the basically transit nodes to the rest of the Belt and Road. So again, I think the Belt and Road is a 2050 type of vision. So I'm not worried that it's going to stall. We're just having a little blip that the entire world is hitting the same blip. So it's not because of China or because Belt and Road is flawed in some way. This is a huge vision, and it has to happen. It has to happen because goods need to flow. And as soon as other people see, hey, Laos is doing really great, they're going to want the same thing, right? It's just like the way my friend Helen Hai, one of my friends from the World Economic Forum, Young Global Leaders, she started something called Made in Africa because she was part of an investment bank. She went with a shoe factory CEO, to Ethiopia, met the president, and the president invited them to start a shoe factory. And I think within 3 years, she made 3,000 jobs. And she started to do light industry economic zones with the president. And then this became 8 heads of state in Africa. So I think as soon as you have one pilot that works well, everybody else is going to want it. So I'm starting to see this in Laos. So instead of going up towards Russia, which is a little bit sort of dicey right now, and now because a lot of the rail goes through Russia, the European part is a little blockaded. We're going to see this huge push down towards Southeast Asia, more so than before. It was going to happen, but now it's more so towards Africa. So I think Belt and Road still happening, is just slightly shifting, right, in terms of where we're prioritizing our attention.
But all of you, all four of you, mentioned that learning from certain experiences, you cannot predict the future. You have to see micro projects and learn from that, and so on and so forth. Learning means the freedom to digest, on the one hand side, the experience, and decide free to change the movement or the idea. And what about the dependencies in the new Silk Road? Because many countries are really dependent because of financial issues. So they took credits and have to pay them back. They are somehow dependent on certain on China, for example, as one of the major financiers of the new Silk Road. So how can learn happens under that kind of dependency? Miguel, is that possible?
Yeah, so it's a hard thing, right? But Peggy mentioned something important, right? The commercial part of, or the trade part of the new Silk Road, right? And the truth is that there is no investor that doesn't want anything in return, right? And China is actually smartly playing on that part of, I help you to develop your economy, but I want something in return, right? So here again is about how much each country compromises their own reality, or how much they want to depend on China in the future because of economic means. So China brings, so I'm 20 years living in China, so I might be a little bit biased because I was somehow formed in China in many aspects. But China brings something that the Western world, developed world, didn't bring. China brings money, specific projects, specific things that people see in infrastructure, that in the end, if this infrastructure doesn't exist, the rest wouldn't happen. Right? Sustainability wouldn't happen. So, and for that, China asked for something. Now again, so China can ask me for 50 years, control the port of my country, and I can say no. And I can, go into the negotiation of, I'm willing to give you this, you can give me less or more. You understand? So it's about how we devise the negotiation based on future compromises, how we sacrifice our own countries for the money that we get today. How do we sacrifice this in the future? And this is what I think the West is not thinking properly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mai, you rose your hand. Mai?
Peggy, go ahead.
Well,
I raise my hand.
Then please, Peggy.
Hear
Sorry.
Mai's response to what I'm going to say, because I feel like whenever people bring up the debt trap, it's a little bit like they're holding a mirror up to their own face, because these countries are going to borrow from somebody. It's just not the Western world. So now all of a sudden is China lending? It's bad. I mean, it just seems like that seems very hypocritical to me. And at least China is being very open and honest that it wants something in return. However, it knows that it needs to be a long-term relationship. So it's not going to be like a shark and say, like the US, right? China bailed out US, is it in 2008 with all these treasury bonds? And then all of a sudden they printed more money and then treasury bonds weren't worth anything. I don't believe China as a whole is going to do that. Of course, there's bad corporate actors. The world is ruled by bad corporate actors. So I would love to hear Mai's response to no debt trap. This is just a mirror of hypocrisy.
Mai,
Yes. It was quite interesting because I actually brought up the same issue in my presentation, talking about hydropowers. And the main takeaway is that, hydropowers will have impacts no matter if they are built by the Chinese, if they are built by the Brazilians, if they are built by the Europeans, there will be impact. Okay, so pinpointing saying Chinese hydropower is environmentally harmful, that's the wrong approach. So I agree with Peggy is that, it's not just about China, and as a result, bad things are happening. You see what I'm saying? Don't see the person, but see the project itself. So then it's really important, going back to debt trap, you're absolutely right. They have to borrow from somebody. It doesn't matter if it's China. And in many cases, there are other banks who refuse to lend the money. And as a result, the country couldn't have electricity. So then, it's not China's fault to lend the money because the others don't want to lend the money in that sense. So my point is really about every project will have impacts, Belt and Road or not. It's really about then how we empower the local stakeholders to be aware of the impacts and to build, the capabilities to mitigate these impacts, whether is it social, whether is it environment, whether is it, governance. And I agree with you again, Peggy, the corporate, I always say this very importantly, I have to work with the source of the problem. And who are the source? What is the source of the problem? It is the corporates, it is the companies, it is the people who are in the field doing these projects.
Yeah.
Because all this Belt and Road project is not the Chinese government. They are actually sourced out to state-owned enterprises, private companies.
That's right.
Some are even, bid by other, Western companies, as long as it's supported by AIIB. I've seen many projects in Belt and Road supported by AIIB Bank, but it is actually been, contracted to Western companies. And as a result, things.
What you just said
Sorry,
about
go ahead.
what you just said was so important, which is if a lot of these countries need financing and they're not being financed. For example, Argentina, right? Why is it that we have 3 networks of bilateral currency swaps, right? It's because maybe the U.S. and their allies will refuse to finance Argentina now. So who does it turn to? Well, are you going to blame China for helping? This is why China actually is communist, because they turned to the US for financing, and twice they refused to answer or to loan China money. And so China then went to Russia for financing. So I think that point is really, really important. Go. People have to dig deeper instead of just use these scary terms like debt trap. Right, Carlo?
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Peggy. My friends, can I chip in 1 second because I had some problem with the connection. So, I like the debates on it, but I was on the idea that the Belt and Road Initiative was a project open to all the countries, not only to China financing project. If in the end is China financing the project, this means the other countries, they are not interested in this project. So Belt and Road Initiative lose the foundation. It's just a project of China lending money to other countries, create debt traps which cause political control. What we are saying as a European Chamber is, let's follow the international rules of procurement. Let's open the opportunities for companies to bid in projects. And let's see if international banks, they are interested to funding this project. If there is no appetite for this project, you may understand that there is not an economical project. It's just a borrowing money to create political pressure in order to have seen by a politician that you see this bridge, I did it, but now your nephew and the nephew of your nephew shall pay the debts of that bridge. That said, when we are discussing as what our members feeling in the Belt and Road Initiative, we get only the scramble. And in many projects, we don't even bid because there are not a proper economical return. That said, we are not discussing if US will borrow the money or EU or this. We are not. My discussion is on a perspective of European businesses doing business in China and the possibilities to involve their headquarters in the Belt and Road Initiative. At the moment, the question is the procurement, the rules of procurement is really unclear and not transparent. They are definitely not follow the international procurement procedure. And let's see now with the EU approving the international procurement instrument, what is going to happen to the Belt and Road and to all the state-owned enterprises there at the moment winning the bids. Thank you.
Miguel.
Yeah, I just gonna say something related to what Carlo just mentioned. And when I was consulting for government or business organizations in terms of doing business in China or entering China, cooperation with China, I used to emphasize the fact that the only area that exists in China is the gray area. And we need to really navigate that thing. So Carlo was saying there, the things are not clear. And it's true, it's really for Chinese people in general to speak clearly, it takes a little bit of time, and you need to know how to navigate to reach that clarity, right? What the Western world is not doing is precisely that homework. How do you navigate through the gray area to where there is clarity? And for that, culturally speaking, it requires a certain social skills to break through the wall of acquiring a little bit the secrets. China has a very skillful ways to gather information from others and not to give too much information, see? And that's why China understands better what the Western world wants to hear and say it. And so when they say it, the Western world say, okay, so it's done. The Western world base agreements on the contract. For China, as I experienced it for those years, the contract is the beginning of the negotiation. So, understanding that should help the West to devise ways to get that clarity, right? Because if China has been doing this for so long, and the West continues developing cooperation with China, there is then something wrong in how we evaluate clarity from the side of China. It is a reality of China. We cannot avoid it. We need to understand how to navigate that reality.
But Miguel, I can double underline your argument. But that holds true then for all collaboration partners in the belt, for example. Yeah,
it
Road
does.
and Belt. So it's not only the Western world. It holds true for everybody, every country who negotiates about the terms and conditions with China. So that means there is a high uncertainty or even a high level of not understanding the rules or maybe the hidden rules.
We also say in China, that the only certain thing about China is uncertainty. So, but my point is that we need to accept that that's the reality. So if we take reality in our hands and then we say, okay, if this is the reality, how do I navigate in this? See, that's the point. That we need to understand China from the Chinese perspective rather than from El Salvadorian perspective, for example. Like when China wanted to invest in the port in El Salvador, I advised not to sign a contract for 50 years, not to accept more workers from China as compared to percentage of workers from El Salvador. Because this is what is actually happening. But countries are allowing China to say that. If I offer you this and you say yes, now it's your responsibility because you say yes. Right? And Peggy said, at least China is being honest. This is what I can give you, and this is what I want. It's for you to say yes or no.
Yes, Peggy, after 2 seconds and after I will give you the word, just to discuss with Miguel. I am Italian and I speak many languages, but today we decide to speak English in order to all of us understand each other, right? So if China is the second economy of the world and want to play and sit in the table with international treaty, with international countries, and want to have an international approach, we cannot say, in China everything's great, this is the way we are doing business in China. Because we are not discussing how to do business in China. We are discussing how to do business with China. And China should also understand all other countries in the world they are doing businesses. This is the way why the EU Commission implemented the mechanism, international procurement mechanism, or the screening on third-party investment, in order to say there are rules and regulations that we agreed in the WTO and so on, in order to be applied in the same way. If China implement this Belt and Road Initiative for investment, it's a great initiative. We are doing business, we are not do politics, but give us the rules that we can understand in order to play the same game. Not that the referee wear the jersey of one of the teams playing the game. Because this in the end create confusion. And yes, I can also speak Mandarin to referee, but I prefer to speak a language that everybody else understands in order to have rules similar and equal for everybody. Equal treatment and full transparency. Thank you, please.
So, Carlo, as a legal advisor, that is a clear double underline. I want to summarize this round a bit. I think we have to learn to negotiate with China in terms of understanding better the negotiation lines, the background of Chinese way of negotiating, and after signing contracts, Miguel said the negotiation starts then to find the specific agreements with the people. But on the other hand side, you mentioned as well the impact matters. So May and Peggy, you mentioned that of course the empowerment of the local stakeholders that matters in order to tackle the future challenges. So having said this, and even the international agreements which Carlo mentioned in his contribution, what role does the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, plays then in that whole endeavor, in that whole initiative? Because I think that could be a kind of reference point in the future development. So the 17 goals from UN, does it play a certain role in that whole initiative? Peggy, you are advisor for sustainability. So what kind of role does the SDGs play?
You know, as soon as the SDGs launched, we had this whole, I mean, the World Economic Forum was like just behind it, and a lot of my friends are leading these SDGs in various parts of the world. But I have to be honest, I think in China, I personally don't see a lot of momentum behind the SDGs. I feel the reason is because they seem very like white paperish. They're not really touching the hearts of normal people. You know, it's not like the propaganda red banner in my village that says clean water or a safe neighborhood begins with me. You know, it doesn't touch me like that. So I think the true way to have impact is, again, pilots that work. China understands small pilots that become 2 pilots, then become 10 city pilots, and 15, then, you know, the whole country takes over immediately. And so I think that for the SDGs to become real, we need to make it much more human, much more alive, and much more grounded for the ordinary, especially rural Chinese villager. So I'll say that. But I need to go back to what Miguel said about gray area, because I cannot emphasize to people who have not lived and worked in China enough. I cannot emphasize enough. People don't understand how far back Chinese people and Chinese government, Chinese corporate executives are in terms of learning how to work in the Western world. They only know the Chinese way. So yes, the Chinese have to work in the Western world, but we have to give them a little time. I think the problem is China's infrastructure has gone, it's like Yao Ming, right? But in terms of understanding Western culture, we're still crawling. When I started joint US-China collaboration on clean energy, it was out of these first public dialogues between US and Chinese government officials on clean energy. And they said to me, we have 60 memorandums of understanding between the two countries today, nothing tangible to show for it, because they didn't understand programmatic collaboration. And so they asked me to start this NGO so I wouldn't be handicapped by the government, but I would be supported by both sides. And what I realized was being a cultural bridge is the thing that will make or break success in terms of globalization today. In terms of whether or not the Belt and Road is going to succeed, is whether or not we have people like Miguel and Mai and Carlo and myself and Frank, etc., working to create programmatic collaboration. Because the Chinese officials, I mean, when I can't remember which year this was, 2017, I think, I created the first class at the Chinese Academy of Governance on how to build trust with Westerners. They've never done anything like this before. And I'm not going to kid you, okay? I had 10 things that they should learn. The first one was how to smile with teeth. And I showed American Idol judges. I'm not kidding. This is how, I mean, the second thing was how to hug. And I literally lined people up. This is like the vice dean of the Chinese military academy level, you know, that level of players, right? And the next day I was having a private breakfast with him, and he said, oh, they loved that, and they were practicing how to hug after dinner. You know, it's so, give Chinese people a break a little bit, right? You know, like we have to understand where we're coming from, and be a little bit more gentle in letting Chinese understand how to communicate. Don't just say, hey, they're sophisticated in every way. Because they're not communicating at this level, they must have nefarious intentions. That just isn't the case. It's just that, you know, Miss Universes are still being trained on how to not use a knife and fork to eat bread at a dinner table. So, you know, give Chinese people a little bit of a break.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Miguel, yes, of course.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry. Just one thing that Peggy is saying, right? So give Chinese people a little break. And I might be wrong on this, but I will make a distinction between Chinese people in general and the Chinese government, right? So Carlo is speaking about negotiations with high-level authorities that give no clear contracts, no clear things, right? And that, I think, is part of the competitive strategies of China. Yeah? But I totally agree with Peggy. When I was in China, you know, for example, hugging, I remember this case. I was given introducing my book, Egos at Work, and I say, have you ever hugged your coworker? And I was like, who wants to do that, right? So during the presentation of the book, I asked people to, you know, hug each other. It was actually something very difficult to do. But again, there are two different pictures, right? Chinese people in general and the high-level officials who are dealing with international agreements, and those agreements are not clear. And I totally agree with Carlo. I mean, it's like if you are going to do business in the international community and everybody else agrees on this and you agree on this, but you don't follow, then something has to be done. And here is that if China doesn't follow, we have to have something to be done and do it. But this is not happening. And that creates the vicious cycle of, you know, coming again and again, but you didn't do it yesterday and do it today. So we need to act upon those things as well.
Mm-hmm. We reach a very, very nice moment. Yeah, please, Carlo.
I don't know if May wants to say something, but I would like to echo what we are discussing here. You know, when we are discussing about target the China set, another one is important, is the one definitely for the carbon neutrality. That from 2030 the peak and 2060 the carbon neutrality. This was another message delivered by the presidents not so long ago, and as a chamber we made a study in order to find a common ground between EU and China 2030, 2050, because we want not always argue with China, but we want also to find places and grounds where we can find a positive, a constructive way to find common ground, let's say like this. And definitely the target of carbon neutrality in order to have a better world is something that we find our members believe that China can reach this target together with European companies operating in China, which means the sustainability will be improved, which means the environment will be applied in a fair, the protection of environment will be applied in a fair way, and so on. On the other hand, when we are discussing about enforcement of environmental law regulation and our members always inform that the treatment and enforcement against European company is a bit more strict comparing the Chinese SOE and Chinese private company. Regarding on the comment of Peggy, definitely we need to travel. It's important to come back to have a vis-a-vis meeting. It's important to have again a delegation coming to China, delegation from China going to Europe, to the United States, and therefore it's really important that at central level there are some need of change of the policy on the zero tolerance against COVID, because to China in Asia is one of the, if not the last country still requiring days of quarantine in the facilities assigned, while all around the world you can still go around with mask or without mask up to your wish. And this is really important, because if you are only speaking in via conference call or via phone, you lose the human touch. You lose the hug opportunity, Miguel, or you lose the dinner opportunity. That this is really important in many cultural heritage, not only in China, but in many countries back in Europe. And therefore, we are hoping that the steps taken by many countries in Asia, in Southeast Asia, for example, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, to mention few, that they fully reopen to travelers, to fully reopen to business people without quarantine, will be soon adopted also in China. And especially, we hope that this friction among which one the vaccine is best will be passed, and we will give the free will of people to choose which one is the vaccine they want to get job. Just to conclude, remember that China, in the biggest city, they have high number of vaccination rate, but there are still over 250 million people over 60 years old that they did not complete the cycle of vaccine, or they did not get any vaccine. So it's really important to push these other cultural things, not only to give time on China to understand the world, but also China should understand that people should get vaccinated in order to get out of the pandemic situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo, for that point. May, you have...
Yeah, just very quickly, 3 points. The first is going to Peggy's point of giving the Chinese a break. I've worked with a lot of Chinese corporations in the Belt and Road Initiative, and you're absolutely right. You know, they do have the will and they want to do things like ESG and sustainability, but they just don't know how to do it. And I've worked with them, I've trained them, I've gave classes to them in terms of giving them examples, like what you say, SDGs, not like a, such a high level goals, which doesn't translate to real examples they could use on the ground. So I gave a lot of examples. So you're absolutely right. Give them a break, because they do want to do something, but they don't have the knowledge or skills or tangible examples that they could use and apply on the ground, which is really, really lacking. The second thing is about, again, Peggy, you say you gave a class of how to build trust with the Westerners. I'm going to throw the question back to you and say, why don't the Westerners give a class to the Westerners how to build trust with the Chinese? You see what I'm saying here? It's like, why do we have to ask the Chinese to change their way of greetings so then they can gain trust from the Westerners? And then I lead to the third point, which is Carlos' point, very, very good point, common ground. It's about negotiating, it's about coming together, it's about finding the common grounds, the common norms, the common regulations, it's about the negotiation, it's about the compromise, it's about finding the right spot where both parties can say, okay, this is how we can work together. I don't have to hug if I don't want to hug. I can just have a handshake, doesn't matter. But I think that's really important. And I think for all Belt and Road projects, really, in order for it to work, is finding that common ground. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, May. So I think you well summarized the discussion to find a common ground to understand each other. And I can tell you that the Western world company members, staff, and so on are trained into to move and maneuver in China without any frictions, and vice versa. I think in China the people are trained into the Western cultural issues. So I think there is a way of trying to understand each other already. But on the other hand side, I think the level playing field, which Carlo mentioned many times, needs as well to be negotiated. And when I see, Peggy, you mentioned that the SDGs are a kind of white paperish, difficult to understand for companies. You mention the same thing is here, holds true in the Western world. So our companies are really have trouble to understand the SDGs, and we have to translate it into practice. And if I combine the point of Miguel, for example, who differentiates the difference between the normal citizen and the government affairs and government position, so to say, then this SDGs needs to be translated into the daily activities of companies in China, and this is a governmental affair, so to say. So the Chinese government has to take up this role, as well as other governments in the world does it for their countries. So, and I think if that holds true, I don't know. That's a kind of hypothesis from my side. If that holds true, then we have to translate it into the new Silk Road affair as well. So if we want to have a change towards, or a transition towards sustainability in the future, we have to translate these SDGs or that what is sustainability about into activities and into understandable baselines, base grounds for companies and all the other actors within the Silk Road. So otherwise, I think we have a problem. What do you think, Peggy? How can we do that then?
Yeah, remember when I was talking about this, one way to spin the tornado is micro asks. So I think the issue is that the SDGs is like, we've got to get to no poverty, right? No hunger, etc. But like, just give people the first step, the first staircase. And I think that would be really helpful. The other thing is I advocate for people who really want to bring a better future faster to start by envisioning the future. So you have to be the James Cameron that designed the Pandora world in Avatar. You have to be Willy Wonka who created the chocolate factory, right? And it needs to be in such detail that you can taste the lollipop flower, that you can dive into the chocolate stream, and that it's more real, that reality is more real than the protagonist in Avatar's world, right? And so what we're doing when we have a white paper or a whole bunch of statistics for the SDGs is we're not coloring in the detail of that beautiful future that Chinese like to say begins with me, right? Because once you then co-create all these like a Pinterest board, a mood board, if you will, if you're an architect, right? Then everybody subconsciously will be attracted to that future. And if they're attracted to that future, they'll subconsciously say, this is my part in making that future come about. There doesn't need to be a plan. There doesn't need to be a campaign. There doesn't need to be a protest. People just be magnetized to subconsciously to help in whatever way their super genius, their superpower allows them. So I don't know if that inspires somebody, but I really think the Belt and Road, just some Willy Wonka needs to show us what is 2050 in the Belt and Road when everybody can go all up and down Laos to Singapore, and of course Malaysia and, all the other Southeast Asia. Well, what does that look like when in one day I can go from King's Cross to Singapore or Beijing, right? What does that look like for the person who's commuting? When I first moved to China, it was unimaginable that people would commute from Tianjin to Beijing every day. But now with the high-speed rail, you can. So those are the details. Like, what does it feel like in a business class seat on a high-speed rail when you're commuting, right? You need to get to that level of detail, and then people will get really excited. But the SDGs, I hate to be a party pooper, and I try to support my friends, but I really think that whole approach of the SDGs is just wrong. It's just not how humans talk. And you can't convince people to create a whole movement of transformation and behavior change with numbers, because numbers numb. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. But on the other hand side, numbers shows us maybe the environmental costs which you create if you pursue your 2050 vision of traveling from there to there. We have to consider as well maybe the limits of that aspect. Maybe I'm too German in that round. Miguel, please help me out.
I'm sorry, but I want to help Peggy. So one important thing is this, right? Peggy is talking about the whole document is not how you talk to human beings, and this is true. So from a psychological perspective, I use a lot of NLP in my negotiations. Peggy calls the New Silk Road a tornado, and that represents disaster, okay? So we can call it a tree, for example. You put a seed, there is a trunk, there is branches, flowers, and fruits, something like this. But again, so what motivates the majority of people in a country to work individually for the whole country's sustainability situation to get better is what really matters. And so I agree with Peggy, this document should be translated so that people can understand it and feel motivated to work on this. I failed for years and years, I think. I failed in moving people from this behavior to the other because I was basing my approach on rationality. At some point, I realized that I needed to emotionalize, allow me the word, rationality, to be able to rationalize the emotion after that. And this, in human terms, is what it has to be done. Now, this document for agreement between governments and stakeholders, that's all right. But then in the end, they are not going to be doing the job. It's everybody in every country doing it, and they have to understand. No, they have, here against me, rationalizing. They have to feel it so that they work on that. It has to make sense for the majority of people. Otherwise, it will be another document, and there are many of those who remain somewhere in an archive without delivering what we are trying to do. But I also agree with you about numbers. When it comes to rationalization, then we go back to this and say, this is what it costs you, right? And then maybe that red numbers will hit you emotionally in your pocket, and then you will say, okay, so let's work on it, right? So there is value in everything. But the beginning of it, in human terms, is emotional. And so we need to get into that, even if it is, a political thing. I mean, how do presidents get actually people to follow them? They touch people emotionally. I remember a friend of mine from Russia back in the years in the US, in China. She was saying, you know why people voted for Putin? Because he speaks the way Russian people like to be talked to. See, and that happens everywhere, basically. Right? So we are forgetting that in the business world or in the international, serious negotiation. We are dealing with human beings still, regardless of, what we are discussing.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for that German number crunching argument as well. So you're my friend. You saved yourself. I think you mentioned a very, very good thing together with Peggy. So emotionalizing the sustainability and bring it then to the cultural environment in order to create motivation. This is something which we need. But on the other hand side, that happens not like manna falls from heaven. It somehow needs to be triggered, I guess. Yeah. So this is maybe as well, again, a westernized perspective on it. But on the other hand side, I see it worldwide. I've spent some times in Asia. I spent some times in Africa as well. If you don't use a bit of nudge in order to make people thinking about it, you will not reach the momentum and the motivation. So how can we bring in the motivation to respect sustainability or the SDGs, be it then trickled down to a level of understandable baseline? How can we bring in the new Silk Road? Because at the moment, in the negotiations between countries and China, for example, there is nothing like that written in the contracts or something, as far as I guess. So how can we bring it in, or is it something which is then by accident happened? May.
I'll jump in and start this. This is another round of very interesting question, I think. I see there are a couple of ways. First, of course, people say make it mandatory. Have some standards, global standards that every contractor or every project, and we already have some of them in place, in terms of financial guidelines, in terms of, and Carlo mentioned about the international procurement standards, and this will actually help to entrench sustainability into their actual business practices, because it's a compliance issue, yeah? But we do know that compliance is a very, in some countries on the grounds, despite having those rules, you might not have compliance. But that's a very different set of issues we are talking about there. That's about enforcement. So that's one way of doing it. But I would like to go again with Miguel and Peggy that if we really want to talk about sustainability, you can't do it from top down. Top down is not the way. Top down is just, if you're just using regulation as a stick way of trying to get people to do things, it will not work. I genuinely believe, partly because from my background, I'm an educationist, so I believe that you have to come from bottom up. It has to be entrenched in everyone's mindset in terms of what is sustainability, how we can do it, what we should look out for, how do we embed it in our business practices, not just business practices, but in our everyday behavior. And that's where education is important, that's where awareness is important, that's where training is important, and these are the things that are very much missing in that sense. I mean, governments are trying to do this, schools are trying to do this, universities are trying to do this, but it's still not enough out there, I believe. That's my take, because if you put it in a class setting, it's still not good enough. It needs to be everywhere. So I'm sorry I'm idealistic in that way, but I do believe that for sustainability to work, it has to be entrenched in everyone's mindset and behavior.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Can I give the business point of view? This is something is happening. It's not something that you can postpone already. There are European companies that are already following this, and many of them are already based in China. Last February, the EU Commission promulgated the EU Directive on Sustainable Governance, in which tried to push forward the companies in order to see if there is any violation of human rights in their supply chain, if there is any impact on environment. And this is something that will affect also European companies that will operate in Europe. So then, if you want to raise the standard, if you want to be a global player, then you should also follow what the other legislation are doing. And this is really important because there are also some state members, like Germany, that are already looking into implement some supply chain law in order to seek if there is any labor force violation inside your supply chain, upper level and low level. And this is something that indeed is a movement which shall, I agree what we were saying before, shall start from the top but shall be embraced also from the bottom, because in the end it's the consumer that will make the difference. If I'm going to buy some t-shirt with he got some cotton where we don't know where it come from, or if I will... Oh, sorry for that. I mean, in the end, consumer will decide which product we will going to buy, because this will have indeed an impact on the price of goods. And we will say, do we want a t-shirt from with cotton from special region, or we want a t-shirt where we know it's certified, it's sustainable, no damages in environment, and so on and so on. It takes time. This we have to say, but the EU started. Now this directive should be approved by the EU Parliament, and after countries state members will have 2 years in order to adapt their internal regulation for it. And to link what we were saying
so
before.
I think you mentioned a very, very good point, because I said at the beginning that setting up the infrastructure with a new Silk Road maybe is one thing, but at least to make trade within the new infrastructure between the countries within the new Silk Road, and the conditions for trading are relevant as well for sustainability. So you mentioned the directive, the due diligence directive of the EU, and the CSR directive, which is going to come, reporting directive for companies. So European companies, if they want to get a supply from other countries through the new Silk Road channels, maybe have to see from where the pre-products come. So do you think this is something which is also considered within the new Silk Road, that kind of understanding? Because it goes beyond from infrastructure.
It is something, it will take time, but it's something that is the direction is set, because this is what the consumer at the moment wants. And consumer in the end are the human being which will appoint the politician that they will run the countries. So this is a circle that is, the infrastructure is the first step, but after this is the hardware, but after also you need the software in order to get the project going on together. So I'm optimist in this direction. It's a long way, and indeed politicians should see that the final price shall not be paid by the last one, by the consumer, by the citizen, because this is something that should be shared during all the value chain.
I think we reached anyway the end of this session. As we stated as starting point, it's a very difficult topic, sustainability and the new Silk Road as a topic, but because it has so many dimensions to be considered: cultural dimensions, infrastructure dimensions, geopolitical aspects, the understanding between the countries, negotiations, but also common learnings and trying to deal with time perspective, with a longer time perspective, and maybe develop through different stages of developments within the whole endeavor. But I just want to end with this round with a suggestion. I would like to suggest you a sentence which is not a finalized sentence, and I would like to finalize you the sentence. And the sentence which I would like to offer you is: the new Silk Road is a success when maybe Miguel, do you have any idea? When is the new Silk Road is a success, when or if?
Yeah, so I would say that it is a success when we are able to acknowledge our differences, because rather than that, we will be setting up regulations and systems that don't apply to different contexts.
Peggy.
I think fundamentally the Belt and Road is about infrastructure connectivity. And so the initial phase, if everybody is able to experience a high-speed rail trip, I think it will just completely change their sense of what is possible for travel and commute and, who they can hang out with as friends, etc. So that might be sort of a lower level in terms of the Maslow's pyramid than Miguel, but I think it's a good first success metric.
Thank you, Peggy. Carlo.
I would say that is another instrument that we have in order to improve the infrastructure in the world. There is still a lot of work to do it in transparency, in international procurement, in fair play treatment, and indeed we shall think as the European also the European connectivity platform. There is an instrument present there, but indeed is not well communicated, as our Chinese friends are pushing the Belt and Road Initiative in international media. We shall learn from this, and as Europeans make it be better.
Thank you, Carlo. Mai, the last sentence goes to you, please.
Thank you. I have a very interesting one for you guys. The new Silk Road will be a success when it's a win-win-win situation. Win for the Chinese government, win for the host government, and most importantly, win for the local communities. That's it.
Thank you very much. Super. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for that round and that very fruitful and very diverse discussion on different levels. So I thank you very much, Professor Dr. Mai Tan Mullins, for joining us, Professor Peggy Liu for joining us here, having Mr. Carlo de Andrea here with us discussing, and of course Dr. Miguel Angel Serna. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and I wish we could meet in the future somewhere in person. That would be very, very nice.